As you can see by the heading in blue, we're remaining on topic here with Adobe Camera Raw, the shooting and manipulating of raw images. Now we've looked at quite a number of techniques, and what I'd like to do here is to string them all together. I'd like to take one image and take it through global strategic editing, and then maybe finishing touches if required. Someone asked me recently what the subject of semi-abstract meant. There's a competition coming up in the near future, and that is the subject. If you do a Google search on the subject and you look at the images that you can view, most of them are of a subject you can recognize, but obviously done in an abstract way. Now, in these days of powerful image editing, when it's going to be quite easy to take almost any picture and add some filter effects to meet the set subject, I thought it might be quite novel to do something in camera, and I'm sure you're probably well aware of what's been done here. Just a simple blur of the lens on the camera to create the out of focus shapes, and of course the shapes are representative of the shape of the diaphragm in the lens. Now I think this image is clearly an abstract, and it's also clearly a cityscape. So what I'm going to do is to try and get as much impact and appeal out of this image as I possibly can. I'm going to make a start with my lens corrections, so I'm going to go up to the center of the row of icons at the top there. I'm going to tick the box to remove chromatic aberration and also to enable profile corrections. Now I'm going to tick the box. Not a great deal changes, just a little bit of lightness around the edges. Now I could put that back by using the vignette here, but I'm almost certain to be doing something with the edges and corners a little bit later, so I'll deal with them then. Now what I'd like to do is to straighten up the horizon along the back there, because it's tipping up at the left hand side. But because this image is going to be created for a Camera Club competition, where the pixel values that I can work to are 1920, 1080, that's 16:9 aspect ratio. So what I'm going to do here is to see if I can use all of the real estate that's at my disposal, the 16:9, and make this image 16:9 as I work it through Camera Raw. But I need to level it first. So what I'm going to do is pick up my crop to start with and just select the 16:9 preset. Then I'm going to pick up the straighten tool, draw the line to tell Camera Raw that I think that bit there needs to be straight. Just having a look along, I think that looks okay. I could possibly choose to come down a little bit if I wanted to, or up. I think I'll choose something just about that. The 16:9 looks like it's going to work fairly nicely here, so I'm going to touch the enter key to commit that change. Now if we look up at the extreme top right at the histogram, we can see it's looking fairly healthy. It looks as though I could slide the whole thing a little bit to the left, so maybe I could pick up the exposure and just drop the exposure a little bit. Then I could perhaps decide to increase the whites to push that histogram towards the right a little more, and maybe the blacks to push it to the left, and you can see now we're getting some really solid colors coming out. I'll try a little bit more brightness, a little bit more doesn't hurt at all. I think something like that. You see, what I'm trying to avoid is going too far. So as far as I can go, and I'm looking at the histogram as I do this, I think I'm going to stay with that. I'm going to put in a bit of vibrance. Now that looks pretty good, but I'm not too keen on the blue. I think it's overdoing the blue a little bit. So I wonder if I want to keep that level of color in the middle part of the image, then I've got to do something with the blue. Now there's a couple of ways I can do that, of course. I could go up here and just adjust the temperature. Let me have a look at that. I'm just going to make a mental note that it's currently on 6000, but of course we can always double click any of these sliders. But if I wanted to move it a little bit to the right, I actually like the effect I'm getting here. I like the warmer effect in the middle, and it's taken a lot of that blue off the water, and in fact it may have done a little damage to the water. I think the water needs to be slightly different. So I'm going to select that because I went there to see if I could affect the water, but I actually like the effect on the buildings in the background. So I've still got the blue of the water. Do I want to make a little more of it, or do I want it to stay as it is? We don't always know when we're sitting in front of our image. Sometimes we have to try things to determine whether they're going to work in a plus way or a negative way. Now, one of the things we could do is to use the hue, saturation and luminance sliders from the options just under the histogram. And when we select them, we get those 3 tabs and 8 sliders. But of course, if we'd rather use these via the targeted adjustment tool way up on the top left, we can do that too. If I was to do that, I can pick it up. I can choose, I think saturation is what I'm going to want. And I can just click and drag, and you can see I'm increasing the saturation of the blue or desaturation. I'm not sure I'm happy with either, to be honest, so I'm going to double click, and this one changed slightly. I'm going to double click that. So I'm going to try something a little different. Maybe if I come back to the main screen just for a moment. Just thinking about what I could do. I could put a graduated filter on the bottom and make some adjustments, but I'm also looking at the fact that when you look at the water, it's much weaker on the right hand side than the left, and you can say the same about the top right sky too. So I think what we'll do is move on to the strategic editing here, and I'm going to come back to my blue down the bottom if I feel it needs it. So I'm going to try and balance up the top right and bottom right corners. I think I might use a graduated filter for that. I'm going to select it, click and drag onto the picture. Remember, it's always going to remember the last settings we had, and here they're completely inappropriate, so I can right click within the overlay and clear the local correction settings. I can hit the V key just to hide that overlay, and I can just drop down the exposure a little bit, just a touch, and now I'm beginning to balance the left and right a little bit better. I think that's about as far as I want to go there. That's drawn my attention to a little dust mark up the top, so I think at this point I'm going to switch to my spot brush, my spot removal. I always call this my healing brush because I'm so used to that term in Photoshop. So I'm going to select that. We've got a nice even tone over the sky, so I'm going to tick the box to visualize the spots, and there we can see them. I'm just moving that slider. We've got quite a few, and we've got some little specks in the water, although we can't seem to be, or we don't seem to see them in the picture itself. The dust marks on the sensor normally come out like a little donut, and you can clearly see those. So let me go up to my zoom tool, double click to 100%, drag up to the top right corner, reselect the brush, and I'm going to start to do a little bit of work on these. And as you can see, I'm going to drop my brush down quite small for these. I'm going to do all those I can see, because I'm going to darken the sky down at some stage, and when I do that, if there's any dust marks in the sky that I have not seen, then they're going to become visible. So I may as well do them now and be done. So the way I normally work is to do what I can see, touch the space bar, drag to the right, and then I can do the others. Very, very quick to do, as you can see, and I don't think you need to stay with me because you know how this tool works. So give me a couple of minutes and I'll be back. Well, for you it won't be a couple of minutes at all. Now I think it's probably fair to say I spent about 5 minutes doing all of the dust marks, but before I commit the image to a competition I would have probably one last look over the image when I've got it open in Photoshop. But for the moment I've got the colour nice in the middle distance, and the more I'm looking at the water, perhaps that subdued blue is a better option, because when we think about colours, warm colours project forward and cool colours recede into the background. So it's working in our favour here with the blue on the base, but what I need up the top is a similar shade of blue, or certainly a darker blue than I've got. So I think to do that I'm going to turn to another graduated filter. Now you'll notice that my cursor is still hovering around on the right hand side. We're still within the spot removal window here. But I've got to go up and select my gradient tool, but there is a nice easy shortcut, the G key, which I've just pressed. And when I go up to the top and click and drag to create the overlay, you'll notice we don't see the bounding box, because the last time I was in this window I hit it. So I've either got to hit the V key or go down to the bottom right and retick the overlay, because I just want to see how far down we're coming. And I think I'm going to try something like that, but once again I will hide it when I apply the changes. I do like to have that out of my eye line. So I'm going to drag down the top to get it nice and dark. Maybe I'll just drop the temperature down just to give it a bit more blue, match it up a little bit with the bottom. I'm just looking at it and thinking about it for a moment. Does it need anything else? Probably not. Let's come down just a little more. I think I may stay with that, because if I bring the bounding box or the overlay back in play, what I don't want to do is to start to allow this to kill too much colour from up here. But I think I'm reasonably happy with that. So I'm just going to touch the H key. Now what the H key does, it's the equivalent of me going up to the extreme top left, and when I touch the H key for the hand, we go back to our basic tabs, and it just removes all of the overlays from the graduated filters, and we can just have a little look and a timeout and decide if there's anything else we wish to do. Now I did try squeezing a little more vibrance into the picture, but I think I've got the maximum, particularly with the blue. But what I may do is just have a look at the clarity. I may just step the clarity up a little bit, quite like the effect of clarity. And I'm just looking at a little mark there that I can see. So I'm going to double click the zoom tool and have a quick look at that. It's a little weird shape in there, but I think I'll touch that out using my brush here, because if I could see it, then others can see it. And I'll take a quick look around to make sure there's no others that I want to get rid of. You see, as careful as I am, there's still the odd one that I'll find, little marks here and there. But of course, for the sake of what we're doing here, let's say we're happy with what we've done, I'll hit Ctrl 0 to fit the image on screen. Now the last thing I may try before I open the image is the radial filter. So I'm going to double click, and we can see that it's placed the bounding box or the overlay right around the edge. I'm going to right click inside and reset. I'm going to reduce the size of my image. Now you can see I've got a cursor in there that's not going to allow me to do that, but we've been zooming in with Control and Spacebar. Well, Control Alt Spacebar allows me to zoom out a little bit, because sometimes to get the effect I want, I sometimes allow this to just spread out over the edge a little bit. Then I'm going to touch the V key to hide it. Now I can take a look at just dropping down the exposure there, just to hold attention in the center of the frame. But I think I'm ready to open this up into Photoshop. Now I don't think there's a great deal more I'd like to do here. What I can see over here is a little bit of lightness on the edge. Maybe I should have dealt with that in Camera Raw, but I think I can deal with that using my burn tool. So over to the left hand side, midway down, select the burn tool. What shade is it? Is it a highlight or is it a mid-tone? I think it's a bit of a cross between the two. Let me try highlight first. I'm going to put the exposure down to 5%. I want it to be quite low. I'm going to drop the size of the image down so I can just sweep in from one side, because I just want to go over that just a little bit, just to darken it. That's all I really wanted to do. I'll hit Control 0 and bring that back up. And the only other thing I was thinking of was maybe going back to the same tool but selecting sponge, because the sponge works with a nice basic soft edge brush. I'm using saturate at 10%, so what I can do is just enhance the saturation along these blurred lights a little bit. I'll drop the brush down so I don't overspill, but a little bit more there, a little bit more, just to enhance the colour anywhere you think it needs it. Right along the water's edge there, this one can come up, and I think that's looking pretty good. Now I've saved my image as a JPEG, but of course if I'm going to enter it into a competition, and this is nothing to do with Camera Raw at all, but in the interest of just finishing off a start to finish manipulation, I'm going to go to image and image size, because I need my width and height linked together. If I drop that to 1920, my height is going to come out perfect, because we set that crop to the default 16:9. So there's the size of the image that we're going to use. And in a darkened room, sometimes with dark areas like down the bottom here, we can lose the edges when we see this up on a screen. So what I tend to do is to make a selection of the outer edge, Control A, and then edit, stroke, maybe a 1 pixel in an off-white colour. Click OK, Control D to remove the selection. That looks a little bright to me, so I would probably hit Control A, edit, stroke, and I would drop that down even more, something like that. Control D to remove the selection. That looks quite good. Let's get rid of the layers, right click over here and choose black, so we can get a feel for how it's going to be viewed in the club room.